Hey folks, welcome back to the Edupedia world, and I am Abhinay Gupta. Today again we will be continuing with the standards in auditing. Right? We have done a couple of standards already and there are a few more to go. So please stay tuned for that, and I hope you are considering the other lectures as well. Right? Please keep watching them, keep learning, keep preparing yourself. Right? So, the basic standard under consideration for today's lecture would be S.A.A.E 600, which is using the work of another auditor. Right? We know that there are only 3 standards in the 600 series: S.A.A.E 600, 610 and 620. 600 deals with the work of another auditor. 610 deals with the work of the internal auditor, and 620 deals with the work of an audit expert. Right? Now if you ask me, how do we relate to it? How do we remember the numbers? It is very simple. It is a descending order. Right? Who is more powerful? An auditor of a component, that means a statutory auditor of a component, or an internal auditor, or the auditor's expert? Indeed, it is the statutory auditor of the component. So first of all, the number starts with the statutory auditor of the component, S.A.A.E 600, right, which is using the work of another auditor. Moving on to the series, it is who has the second priority, who has a second, who is more powerful in the list after the internal auditor. I mean, the auditor of the component is the internal auditor, right? The internal auditor is at least more powerful than the auditor's expert. So next in the series is using the work of internal auditor, which is 610, and then following both of them is the using the work of auditor's expert, which is 620. So this, if you just remember this, that yes, you have to go with the series of the power, the priority given to them on the basis of the power they have, you will know and you will not be confused with the numbers in the examination. Whenever you are told about using the work of somebody else, hit it directly to 600 series, unless and until we are talking about either the predecessor auditor or the joint auditor. Right? For joint auditor, you have S.A.A.E 299. So don't miss that and don't jumble up with that. Right? Just remember, keep it very clear. Joint auditor is very powerful, equally powerful. Right? That means he's in 200 series. We're talking about certain procedures over there. Right? When you're using the work of other, only other people are included in the 600 series. Joint auditor is not the other person. Right? He may give his separate report, you may give your separate report, but you will be using the work of the auditor of the component, the internal auditor of the company, and the expert that you involve, and not the management. Clear? Right, so these 3 standards will be dealt now in the series. So we start with the number 1 essay in this series, which is using the work of another auditor, standards on auditing 600. Right? And you must also know that this is a continuation of the S.A.A.E. The other 2 standards, 610 and 20, were updated, but this is still the continuation. So you may not find the pattern that we follow in all the standards, which is first we do the scope and objective, and then we go on to the requirements and then the application material and stuff. Over here it is still the old essay that is being continuing, right? And you don't have an update. So I can, for your sake, divide it into and tell you, yeah, this is the scope, this is the requirement, but understand what we are doing is we are learning what is provided. Right? So we will again commence and move ahead with the standard the way it is given by the institute. Why? Because you are preparing for CA final and you have to write your answers in the exam, and the checker will add a reference to the standard which is issued by the institute. So please do not mention the words like this is the requirement, this is the scope, objective, nothing. Over here you have the introduction, you have some definitions, you have the procedures, right? So we'll go ahead with that. But don't worry, it is not a break to your pattern of learning. It is simple. You will seep in, you will feel everything very well, and you will not even understand that yes, there was a huge difference over there. Right with that? So when we proceed with it, the first thing we see is the introduction. So we will be introducing what this essay says, whom, or when we talk about the another auditor, who is the another auditor, What is your responsibility? When do you use the work? Right? These are basically also the scope of audit, you can say. But we will name it as introduction instead of the scope. Why? Because even if you refer to the standard issued by your institute over there, even that talks about this as introduction and not as the scope. Okay with it? So the first thing that we need to understand when we are introducing the standard to you is the reference to S.A.A.E 200. 200 is your first essay you have. Right? The basic principles governing the audit. Remember, all of you, we have taken a class on that. I hope you remember. You are going through the lectures, right, and you're seeping it. Go with 1 or 2 standard a day. Go slow. There's nothing to hurry. You have a lot of time, right? Just understand you need to seep it in. Right? You can do one thing, go through the videos once, next day again play it a little faster, try skipping some things, get to the points and move ahead. That will help you revise it and then move ahead to the next lecture, that is the next standard that we take up. Right? Go slow, watch every day, watch consistently, and I assure you that if you are following what we are describing, right, or what we are demonstrating in the lecture about the essays, you will be able to answer the questions that are asked in your examination. Whatever is the case study based question, you are solving all the cases over here. I'm trying to make it sure that okay, whatever has been given by the institute is in the lecture and is into your mind. Right? If you are referring to the books of various authors, you may not get certain points that I am discussing over here. Right? Because they try to summarize. What they focus on is the flow chart, the summary, the short essay, so that you can flip all the essays in a day, but that doesn't help. Students who are listening to these lectures, who are referring to the standards for the first time, they must be feeling, oh yeah, this is a good thing, one page standard, let's flip through it. But understand, you will not be able to seep in, you will not be able to write in the examination, and you will not be able to score. For that, you will have to get a detailed understanding of the standard. And especially if you are a dummy student, if you are a dummy intern, this is very important for you because you don't have a practical exposure. You have not applied the standard in the practical scenario. Right? So please pay attention to whatever we discuss and keep it into your brain. So first, for this, we would refer to the Standards of Auditing 200, the basic principle governing an audit. So when we were discussing the basic principles of audit, if you remember, we had discussed the responsibility of the auditor. That even when the auditor, the statutory auditor, he uses the work of somebody else, maybe he is delegating some work to his assistant, he is using the work of another auditor, that means the auditor of the component, the branch, the subsidiary or anything, using the work of the internal auditor, using the work of the expert, whosoever work you are using, we don't care. You will be liable for that. You will be responsible for that. Right? All the responsibilities are vested on the statutory auditor. He cannot say that, no, I have based my judgment on the internal auditor's report. So if there is an issue with that, please go and hold the internal auditor. No, he cannot do that. It is your responsibility to apply his findings, apply his documents into your working with prudence. Right? You will have to justify yourself that yes, internal auditor is working very well. Right? The next standard that we'll be doing is S.A.A.E 610. Over there, we'll be discussing in detail of how you use the work of an internal auditor. How do you evaluate whether or not you need to use the work? And if you need to use, to what extent will you use? What will be the effect on your nature, time and extent? What will be the effect on your risk of material misstatement, the ROMM that you have decided? Right? We'll discuss all these things in detail in S.A.A.E 610. And so that will make it a very interesting essay. Right? Please stay tuned for that. Soon after this, you will have that essay in line. Right? So until that, let us put our concentration back to standard 600. Right? Referring to 200, that the responsibility will always vest on the statutory auditor. Okay with that? But if you refer to S.A.A.E 200, it says that okay, it is a responsibility, but still they allow the auditor to rely on somebody else's work, right? But not blindly. Yes, if you want to rely on someone else's work, you will have to be sure that yes, the person's work is correct, appropriate. It may not be 100% correct because you cannot judge everything, right? There are limitations to audit, but still, as per your judgment, they are useful for you, right? They are directing they are like working together with you to achieve your goals and your objectives, right? So if you want to rely on someone else's work, apply your skill, apply the professional due care, analyze it, right? And make sure that you don't have any situation or reason to believe that you should not have relied on the work of the person whose work you're using. If there is any instance like that that makes you feel that you should not be relying, then you should not rely. Otherwise, you will be guilty for that. And if at any point of time you have to rely on the work of someone else, you will mention that fact in your statement that yes, for this particular things, particular item, particular class, I have relied upon the work of the other auditor. Maybe you're not able to visit the branch, right? But yeah, you know that the branch is being audited by a chartered accountant, right? You know his competence, you know his capabilities, check his objectivity, that is it. Right, and then mention it in your report that yes, for the branch, I could not visit the branch because of such restrictions. I could not go, and so we have relied upon the work of the auditor of the branch, and even he's a chartered accountant, he's qualified for that. We have a good track record, we have judged his objectivity and everything is fine. Just mention it in your report that yes, for this purpose, that means for the entire branch accounts, we have relied upon the audit report of the branch auditor. Straightforward, give a disclaimer, no issues with that. Right? And so when we talk about the another auditor, he is the auditor of the component. And you know what is the basic purpose of this standard S.A.A.E 600? When we talk about using the work of another auditor, it is to establish certain standards, right, that will be followed by the principal auditor when he is using the work of another auditor to report on the financial information of the entity. Right? That will be in respect of the financial institution of one or more financial information of one or more component that you are taking into consideration. Right? And after setting those standards, they also deal that yes, it is your responsibility, being a principal auditor, you will be responsible for the work of the component auditor. Whatever you are reporting on the financial statement, you will stand responsible for your report. Right? And it is needless to say that when we are talking about the another auditor of the component, that means the another auditor that we are talking about is the auditor of the component, which very clearly states that he is not a joint auditor and he is not a predecessor auditor. Why? Because joint auditor and the predecessor auditor, both of them are the auditor of the same entity that you are auditing as a statutory auditor. Joint auditor is the other person who is working with you. You have divided the areas, maybe. You may also not have divided the areas, you're working hand in hand, right? You may have divided the components of balance sheet, you may have divided geographical locations, you may have divided it anyway. But the crux is, he is also auditing your entity and you are also auditing the same entity, either with same responsibilities, same areas, or with different responsibilities and different areas. So this SA will not apply on that. And even the predecessor auditor, right? He was auditing this particular entity in the previous financial year, right? So in these two cases, this standard will not apply. Clear with that? And over here also, when you are using the work of another auditor, you will also have to determine how will that work affect your audit, right? You have received the details and the financials and the report on the component, right? Component had certain major transactions with the head office. When they say that yes, the component's accounts are clear, the component did not enter into any fraud, everything is going very well over here, there's no qualification to be made, no emphasis on matter paragraph, nothing over there, it's a clean report. Then you know that okay, even the transactions that are taking place between the head office and the component ought to be clean. Why? Because they have checked it. You may also perform further procedures to confirm that assertion, but that will reduce the extent of the procedure that you perform. Why? Because they have already checked it. You know that there is high probability that everything is correct, but still, because you don't want to take any risk, you will do some minor checking on that, right? So you will also have to decide to what extent do you use the work of the component auditor or the another auditor, and what effect does it have on your overall procedure, overall task, overall act that you perform with respect to the audit of the entity. right? And also understand that if the component's financial statement is immaterial, right, you know that it will have no relevance, you do not need any disclosure requirement for that or anything, then this standard will not apply on that component, right? And at the end, when you are using the work, please determine the effect that it will have on the nature, time and extent of your procedure and the risk assessment that you do, right? That is the only part, only content of the introduction, right? Next, we have certain definitions to see, certain definitions to understand, right? Basically, we need to understand who the principal auditor is. So the act or the standard goes on to say that the principal auditor means the auditor with responsibility for reporting on the financial information of an entity, when that financial information includes the financial information of one or more component audited by another auditor, right? So the entire statement from the beginning till the end is important to define it, right? Try and understand, when you are going to audit a client, right, you have got an assignment, you're going on a client to audit it, and the client does not have any component, it's a standalone entity, you're auditing it, you come back, you issue your report and everything is done. In that situation, you will only be known as the statutory auditor, you will not be known as the principal auditor. Why? Because the definition says that when we talk about the principal auditor, we know that he is the auditor of that entity who has a component, and that component is also audited by another auditor. So when there are two auditors involved, right, when you are the auditor of the entity and then there are certain components and there is some other auditor for that component, remember, only in that situation you will be called the principal auditor, right? Next we have the other auditor. Again, this will impact in the same situation. When there is an entity, there is a component, the auditor of the component is the other auditor, and you are the principal auditor if you are the auditor of the main entity, right? So let us read through the definition. The other auditor means an auditor other than the principal auditor. You are the principal auditor, all other auditors are other auditors. You have 10 components, 20 components, whatever be the case, all those components will have an individual auditor, and that will be known as the other auditor, right? So other auditor means an auditor other than the principal auditor with responsibility for reporting on the financial information of a component which is included in the financial information audited by the principal auditor. If it is not included, as we have seen in the previous slide, right, where the components data, where the components financial information is immaterial for you, you do not include it into your financial statement. And if you do not include it, it is immaterial, then that other auditor will also not be known as the other auditor. Why? Because the financial information of the component which is included in the financial information audited by the principal auditor. That means the financial information of his component is not included in the financial statement of the principal auditor. So he is not the another auditor, he is normal an auditor for that component, right? Do you understand? So that means there has to exist an entity and there has to exist certain components of that entity, right? So the auditor or the person who is appointed as an auditor of the entire entity on the whole is the principal officer, and all the auditors who have been appointed to the other components, they are known as the other auditors. And the last definition that we need to discuss, as provided by the standard, is the definition of the component. So the component means a division. It means a branch, subsidiary, joint venture, associated enterprise, or another entity whose financial information is included in the financial information audited by the principal auditor. Yes. So what do you understand with this? That not all the branch, not all the subsidiary, not all the joint venture, not all the associated enterprise will be known as the component. Only those divisions, branch, subsidiary, joint venture and associated enterprise will be known as the component if their financial information is included in the financial information audited by the principal auditor. Right? Now you understand what a component is. Branch, subsidiary, joint venture, associate, division, anything. All of them are components. Right? But not all components are relevant for you, and not all of them will be known as component, because if their financial information is not included with your financial information, they are not component. They're component only if their financial information is included in your financial information on the whole. Clear with that? So your basic of this standard S.A.A.E 600 is clear now. You know who is the principal auditor, you know who is the other auditor, you know what is the component, you know how to use the work, you know what is your responsibility. All these things are already clear, and this is actually one of the major part of the standard. That is basically the scope and objective of the standard. Right? Next we need to pick up the principal auditor's procedure. What are the procedures that he will be following when he incorporates the work of the another auditor into his audit, into the information on the financial information that he is actually letting out to the board, to the other shareholders, stakeholders and everything. Right? The impact on the report. So the procedures followed, I will just show you a glimpse of it, but we will not be covering it into the lecture today. We'll be starting afresh with the procedures of the principal auditor in the next lecture. Right? So just have a glimpse. It is visit the component, consider the professional competence, obtain it is sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, discuss the audit procedures, review the written summary, and consider the findings. Right? We will discuss in detail about what they are, what are the relevance, what are the aspects, how are they connected, and everything. All those questions of yours will be answered, but in the next lecture. Right? So until then, please stay tuned, and this is Abhinay Gupta signing off. Thank you and bye-bye.